They say every man has a price. JD Vance's was $15 million, a venture capital job, and apparently permission to completely forget he once called his current boss America's Hitler. For 8 years, that worked out great. The money flowed, the promotions came, the principals, those were just a memory. Until Jasmine Crockett walked into a town hall with a folder, a smile, and the energy of someone who'd read every email, every text, every campaign finance report he'd hoped nobody would ever connect. 63 million people tuned in expecting a policy debate. What they got was a public autopsy. If you like watching overconfident men discover consequences for the first time, buckle up. And if this hits different, hit that like button because the algorithm needs to know America's paying attention. The CNN town hall was supposed to be a softball. That's what Vance's team kept telling him in the green room. It's Ohio, his chief of staff said, adjusting his tie. Your home state, friendly territory. Just talk about jobs, manufacturing, the working class, your whole brand. Crockett's a freshman congresswoman from Texas. She's out of her depth. Vance nodded, checking his reflection. The navy suit was perfect. The flag pin was positioned just right. He'd done 100 of these, 1,000. He debated his way from Yale Law to the Senate to the vice presidency. Some congresswoman with a reputation for viral moments wasn't going to rattle him. What he didn't know, what his entire team had failed to discover, was that Jasmine Crockett had spent the last 3 weeks in a conference room with 4 former prosecutors, 2 forensic accountants, and a researcher who'd previously worked for the January 6th committee. They'd built a timeline. They'd cross-referenced donations with decisions. They'd found emails his own campaign thought were buried. And she'd practiced, hours of practice, not for the cameras, for the silences, for the moments when she'd stop talking and let him drown in his own inability to answer. The Columbus Convention Center was packed, 2,000 seats, every one filled. CNN's cameras were positioned for maximum coverage. Jake Tapper sat at the moderator's desk, looking appropriately serious. The audience was a mix, some MAGA hats, some Harris Walls buttons, plenty of undecideds who'd shown up because politics had become America's most dysfunctional reality show. Vance walked out first, waving, confident. The applause was strong. This was Ohio after all, his people. Then Crockett walked out. She was wearing a red blazer, power red, the kind that photographs well and says, "I came to fight." Her heels clicked against the stage floor with a rhythm that somehow sounded like a countdown. She carried a thin leather folder, maybe 30 pages, held casually at her side like it was nothing important. She smiled at Vance, not warm, professional. The kind of smile that says, "I know something you don't want me to know." The first 40 minutes were standard political theater. Questions about inflation, immigration, healthcare. Vance delivered his talking points with practiced ease. Crockett pushed back with policy counterarguments. The audience clapped in partisan waves. Jake Tapper kept time, normal, predictable, safe. Then the format shifted to direct exchange, and Crockett straightened in her chair. Vice President Vance, she began, her voice smooth as honey poured over broken glass. I want to talk about something you should be proud of, your remarkable American success story. Vance smiled, sensing friendly territory. Happy to discuss it, Congresswoman. From Middletown, Ohio, to Yale Law School, to the vice presidency. That's the American dream right there. She paused. Of course, most American dreams don't come with a $15 million check from a billionaire who literally wrote that freedom and democracy aren't compatible. But hey, details. The audience shifted. Someone laughed nervously. Vance's smile tightened. Peter Thiel is a successful entrepreneur who supported my campaign like many donors support many candidates. Oh, I know he supported your campaign, Crockett interrupted, opening her folder for the first time. I'm just curious about the timeline. See, I'm a lawyer. I like timelines. They tell stories. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. 2011, you meet Peter Thiel at Yale Law School. He gives a talk about how America has stagnated. You later write that he was possibly the smartest person you'd ever met. Flattering. She pulled out another sheet. 2016, Thiel gives you a job at Mithril Capital, his venture fund. That's the same year you wrote in The Atlantic that Donald Trump was cultural heroin, an opioid for the masses. Interesting word choice given your family history. We'll come back to that. Another sheet. 2017, you leave Mithril but stay connected to Till's network. 2019, you start your own fund, Narya Capital. Guess who the primary backer is? Peter Thiel, along with Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO. Billionaire buddies helping out. Vance shifted in his seat. These are all public. I'm not done with the timeline, Mr. Vice President. Crockett's voice sharpened just slightly. February 2021, Peter Thiel personally escorts you to Mar-a-Lago to meet Donald Trump, the man you called America's Hitler in a text message to your law school roommate. Suddenly, you're having dinner with Hitler, metaphorical Hitler, whatever. The audience gasped. Someone shouted something unintelligible. 2022, you announce your Senate run. Peter Thiel donates $15 million to your super PAC. That's the largest individual donation to a Senate candidate in American history. $15 million from a man who wrote, and I'm quoting here, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible." She looked up from her papers. So let me make sure I understand your American dream correctly. Mr. Vice President, you met a billionaire who doesn't believe in democracy. He gave you jobs. He funded your investment firm. He introduced you to Donald Trump. He gave you $15 million to win your Senate seat. And now you're Vice President of the United States. Crockett leaned back, letting that sit for a moment. In Texas, we have a word for someone who's paid by a rich man to say what that rich man wants to hear. But this is a family show, so I'll just use the polite term, purchased. The audience erupted. Someone in the back stood up and started clapping. Then another. Within seconds, half the room was on its feet. Not because they necessarily agreed with Crockett politically, but because they just witnessed something they rarely see on television, a politician being confronted with their own paper trail and having absolutely no escape route. Tapper's gavel came down 3 times before order was restored. The CNN control room was already getting flooded with social media alerts. Clips were going viral before the segment was even over. Vance was already leaning forward, face reddening, the composed Yale debater giving way to something raw, more desperate. Let me be very clear about something, Crockett continued before Vance could respond. I'm not saying there's anything illegal about accepting campaign donations. That's how our broken system works. What I am saying is that when one man gives you $15 million, when that same man gave you your first job, funded your company, introduced you to your political patron, at some point, we have to stop calling it support, and start calling it what it is, ownership. She pulled out another document. I had my team analyze every major policy position you've taken since 2019. Immigration, tech regulation, cryptocurrency, foreign policy, antitrust, every single one. You know what we found? A 93% alignment with Peter Thiel's publicly stated positions and investment interests. She held up a chart, simple, visual, damning. 93%, that's not political philosophy, that's a script. And the 7% where you disagree. All low-stakes cultural issues that don't affect Thiel's bottom line. Vance's lawyers in the front row were furiously texting. His communications director looked like she was watching her career dissolve in real time. That's an outrageous, I make my own decisions. Peter Thiel is a donor, not a puppet master. Then let me ask you something simple, Crockett said, her voice dropping to something almost gentle. Name one major policy position where you disagree with Peter Thiel. Just one. Silence. Immigration. You're aligned. Tech regulation. Aligned. Ukraine. Aligned, you both want to abandon it. Cryptocurrency. You own Bitcoin. He's invested billions in crypto companies. Aligned. She spread her hands. I'm not saying you're a puppet, Mr. Vice President. I'm saying the strings are very, very hard to see. And I'm saying $15 million buys a lot of alignment. Vance tried to recover, launching into a defense about shared values and principled conservatism, but the damage was done. You could see it in his eyes, that flicker of recognition that this wasn't going to be a softball after all. If you think that was uncomfortable, wait until you hear about the Hitler quote. Share this with someone who needs to see what accountability looks like. Crockett let Vance talk for about 90 seconds. She didn't interrupt, didn't react, just sat there with the folder in her lap, occasionally glancing at her notes like a teacher waiting for a student to finish a wrong answer. When he finally wound down, she nodded slowly. "Mr. Vice President, I appreciate that explanation. I really do. But I want to talk about something more personal now. Something you wrote yourself." She pulled out a printed screenshot. February 2016. A text message to your Yale Law roommate, Josh McLaurin. He's a state senator in Georgia now, by the way. He made this public during your Senate campaign. So, this isn't a leak. This is your own words. She read aloud, her voice clear enough for every camera to catch. "I go back and forth between thinking Trump is a cynical asshole like Nixon, who wouldn't be that bad and might even prove useful, or that he's America's Hitler. How's that for discouraging?" The room went completely silent. "America's Hitler," Crockett repeated slowly, letting each syllable land like a hammer blow. "Your words about the men you now serve as vice president. The men you've defended on every network, at every rally, in every interview for the past 3 years. The men you stood behind at the Republican National Convention and called the greatest president of my lifetime." A woman in the audience audibly gasped. Cell phones were out everywhere, recording. But wait, there's more. October 2016, after the Access Hollywood tape, you remember that tape? The one where Donald Trump bragged about grabbing women without consent. You tweeted, "Fellow Christians, everyone is watching us when we apologize for this man. Lord, help us." 2 days later, Trump makes people I care about afraid. Immigrants, Muslims, etc. Because of this, I find him reprehensible. God wants better of us. She pulled out more printed tweets, each one like an exhibit at a trial. March 2017, after he'd already been inaugurated, "In 4 years, I hope people remember that it was those of us who empathized with Trump's voters who fought him most aggressively. You weren't just opposed to him, Mr. Vice President, you were proud of your opposition. You thought history would vindicate you." Another paper. NPR interview, August 2016, "I'm going to vote third party because I can't stomach Trump." You literally couldn't stomach the men you now serve lunch with at the White House. The Atlantic, same year, "Trump is cultural heroin. He promises the needle in America's collective vein." And my personal favorite, a private message where you wrote, "I might have to grit my teeth and vote for Clinton." Hillary Clinton. You almost voted for Hillary Clinton because Donald Trump was that reprehensible to you. The audience was murmuring constantly now, a low hum of disbelief and fascination. Crockett looked up directly at Vance, and her voice took on an almost sympathetic quality, the way a prosecutor might speak to a defendant who's clearly guilty but deserves a moment of human acknowledgement. "So here's my question, Mr. Vice President, and I genuinely want to understand. Either you were lying then, when you called him America's Hitler, when you said he was reprehensible, when you said you couldn't stomach him, when you literally compared him to the men who orchestrated the Holocaust, or you're lying now when you call him the greatest president of your lifetime. There's no third option. Which is it?" Vance leaned forward, trying to project confidence. "Congresswoman, I've addressed this many times. I was skeptical of President Trump in 2016. Many people were, but his record in office changed my mind. He delivered peace and prosperity. He delivered an insurrection," Crockett cut in flatly. "And I've acknowledged that I was wrong to doubt him. People are allowed to change their minds." Change their minds. Crockett's eyebrows rose. "Mr. Vice President, you didn't change your mind. You changed your price tag. In 2016, you had principles. You just couldn't afford them. By 2022, Peter Thiel was offering $15 million. And suddenly, America's Hitler became your best friend." She pulled out one more document. "This is an email you sent to a former colleague in 2017. My team obtained it through a FOIA request related to your nonprofit work. We'll get to that nonprofit in a minute. You wrote, I've decided to align with Trump's movement. Not because I believe in him, I don't. But because that's where the energy is. You have to ride the wave or drown." She held up the paper so the cameras could see it. "Not because I believe in him. I don't. Those are your words, Mr. Vice President. You don't believe in the men you serve. You just wanted to ride the wave." The audience was murmuring now. Vance's team, visible in the front row, looked like they were watching a car crash in slow motion. So when I call you purchased, Crockett continued, I'm not being partisan. I'm being accurate. You told us yourself. You don't believe in him. You just couldn't afford your principles anymore. She paused, letting the silence fill the room. You didn't change your mind about Donald Trump, Mr. Vice President. You changed your ambitions. And America deserves to know the difference. Vance opened his mouth to respond, but Tapper was already calling for a commercial break. As the lights shifted, Crockett calmly organized her papers, not looking at Vance once. She wasn't done. She was just getting started. Comment and tell me, have you ever seen someone flip-flop this hard for money? Because we're about to talk about how he betrayed the very workers he claimed to champion. When they returned from break, Vance had visibly composed himself. His team had clearly given him talking points during the commercial: pivot to policy, emphasize his working-class roots, don't engage with the personal attacks. It might have worked against a normal opponent, but Crockett had already moved to her next folder tab. Mr. Vice President, she began, her tone shifting to something almost sympathetic. I want to talk about your book now, Hillbilly Elegy. Beautiful title, powerful story. You wrote about growing up poor in Middletown, Ohio. About your mother's addiction, about feeling abandoned by a system that didn't care about working people. Vance nodded cautiously. It's my story, my family story. And you turned that story into a mission, didn't you? You said you wanted to help communities like yours, to bring jobs back to Appalachia, to prove that these forgotten Americans weren't forgotten anymore. That's exactly what I've dedicated my career to. Then let's talk about App Harvest. Vance's face flickered just for a moment with something that looked like genuine fear. App Harvest, Crockett continued, was a startup in eastern Kentucky. Indoor farming, high-tech greenhouses. They promised to bring thousands of jobs to one of the poorest regions in America, the exact kind of company someone who wrote Hillbilly Elegy would love. And you did love it, didn't you? She pulled out documents. March 2017, you joined App Harvest's board of directors. You invested $150,000 of your own money. Your venture fund, Narya Capital, the one backed by Peter Thiel, made App Harvest one of its first major investments. I believed in their mission, Vance said carefully. Many investors. Oh, I know you believed. Let me show you how much you believed. She held up a printout of a Fox Business interview. February 2021, the day App Harvest went public. You said on camera, it's not just a good investment opportunity. It's a great business that's making a big difference in the world. Big difference in the world, those were your exact words. Another document. Here's what was happening inside the company while you were on the board. I have testimony from workers. Anthony Morgan, a former crop care specialist. He left his job at an auto parts plant to join App Harvest because they promised better benefits and a mission he could believe in. She read from a printed statement, her voice slowing down to let every word land. The first few months were fine. Then production fell behind, and everything changed. They cut our healthcare benefits, extended our shifts. We were working in greenhouses where temperatures hit 110 degrees, sometimes 115, and they kept shortening our water breaks. Guys were collapsing from heat exhaustion. I saw a coworker carried out on a stretcher, a man with 3 kids who took that job because they promised it would be better than the auto plant. His wife called me crying from the hospital. The audience had gone completely silent. Several people were wiping their eyes. But Anthony Morgan wasn't done, Crockett continued. He wrote me a letter when he heard about this town hall. He asked me to read part of it on camera, so I'm going to honor that request. She pulled out a handwritten letter, handling it carefully. Dear Congresswoman Crockett, I read Hillbilly Elegy in 2017. Oh, I cried because it felt like someone finally understood what it's like to grow up poor in a place everyone's given up on. When I heard the author was investing in a company bringing jobs to Kentucky, I thought maybe things were finally changing. I left a job I'd had for 11 years to join App Harvest. I believed in what JD Vance said he believed in. But what I got was 60-hour weeks in a greenhouse so hot my boots left marks on the floor. What I got was my healthcare cut 2 months before my wife's surgery. What I got was a promise broken by the same men who made millions writing about broken promises. JD Vance says he cares about people like me. I don't believe him anymore, and I don't think I'll ever believe anyone like him again. Crockett set the letter down gently. That last part is what breaks my heart, she said quietly. Not just that Anthony Morgan was betrayed by a company JD Vance invested in and sat on the board of, but that it taught him not to trust anyone who says they want to help. That's what happens when people like you exploit working-class pain for money and power. Mr. Vice President, you don't just hurt the people directly in front of you. You destroy their ability to believe in anyone. She pulled out more documents. But here's what really bothers me, Crockett continued. I obtained board meeting minutes through discovery in a shareholder lawsuit. April 2021, 1 month before you left the board. There's a vote on whether to cut employee healthcare benefits to preserve capital. The vote was 7-2. Care to guess how you voted? Vance said nothing. You voted yes. You voted to cut healthcare for workers making $12 an hour in 100-degree greenhouses so the company could preserve capital. And then you left the board 1 month later, right before everything fell apart. She pulled out more documents. 2023, AppHarvest files for bankruptcy, $341 million in debt. Workers lose their jobs. The workers who replaced them. Migrant laborers from Central America, because local workers had been burned too badly to come back. The company that promised to save Appalachia ended up abandoning it just like everyone else. Crockett stood up now, walking toward the edge of the stage where Vance sat. You wrote hillbilly elegy about your family being abandoned by systems that didn't care about working people. Then you sat on a board that cut healthcare for working people. You voted to make their lives harder. And when it all collapsed, you were already gone, running for Senate, talking about how much you loved the working class. She was close enough now that the cameras caught both their faces in the same frame, her controlled fury, his barely concealed panic. That's not irony, Mr. Vice President. That's betrayal. You didn't just fail to help the people you claim to champion. You actively voted to hurt them. And then you used their stories, their pain, to sell books and win elections. She walked back to her podium, letting the silence stretch. Anthony Morgan lost his healthcare because of a vote you cast. He couldn't afford his daughter's asthma medication for 3 months. But I'm sure your hillbilly elegy royalties helped you sleep at night. The audience was stirring now, uncomfortable, angry, some wiping their eyes. Vance's attempt to respond, something about not being aware of operational decisions, died in his throat. Crockett looked directly into the camera. Share this with anyone who ever believed JD Vance cared about working people, because the receipts say otherwise. She gave him 2 minutes to recover, enough time for Vance to deliver a stammering defense about how he'd left the board before the worst problems, how he couldn't have known, how his intentions were good. Crockett listened patiently, almost sympathetically, nodding occasionally. When he finished, she picked up right where she'd left off. Mr. Vice President, I appreciate you explaining your intentions. Intentions matter, but you know what matters more? Actions. And I want to talk about another action you took, another mission you started that didn't quite work out the way you described it. She pulled out a new set of documents. 2017, you moved back to Ohio. You were everywhere talking about the opioid crisis, how it had devastated your family, your community, how you wanted to help. And you started a nonprofit to do exactly that, Our Ohio Renewal. Beautiful name. Vance nodded slowly, clearly wary. The mission statement was ambitious. I printed it out. She read, Our Ohio Renewal is dedicated to promoting the ideas and addressing the problems identified in JD Vance's #1 bestseller, Hillbilly Elegy, related to divides along racial, economic, and cultural lines. You were going to fight opioid abuse, help struggling communities, use your platform for good. We did meaningful work. Let's look at the numbers, shall we? She pulled out IRS filings. Year 1, Our Ohio Renewal raised $221,000. Not bad for a new nonprofit. Now, where did that money go? She traced a line with her finger. $50,000 went to actual programs, anti-opioid programming, research, that kind of thing. $50,000 out of $221,000, 23%. Not great, but okay for a startup nonprofit. Another paper. But here's where it gets interesting. $63,000, more than what went to programs, went to management services paid to your principal officer, a gentleman named Jai Chabria. She looked up. Care to tell the audience who Chabria is? Vance's jaw tightened. He was the nonprofit's executive director. He was also your top political advisor, Crockett cut in. He ran your Senate campaign. He's currently a senior advisor to your vice presidential office. So, let me make sure I understand. You started a nonprofit about the opioid crisis that killed members of your family. And in year one, you paid your political advisor more than you spent on actually fighting opioids. The audience murmured. But wait, it gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective. She held up more filings. Years 2, 3, 4, and 5, our Ohio renewal raised less than $50,000 each year, so little that the IRS didn't even require detailed public filings. The website was shut down. The Twitter account posted exactly 2 tweets, then went silent forever. She looked at Vance. I called the spokesperson for Ohio's largest anti-opioid coalition, the people doing the actual work. I asked them about our Ohio renewal. You know what she said? I've never heard of that organization. Dead silence. Your own state, your signature issue, the coalition on the front lines of the crisis you wrote a best-selling book about, and they've never heard of your nonprofit. Crockett walked back to her podium, pulling out one final document. Last year, my team sent a FOIA request to the IRS for all documents related to our Ohio renewals activities. You know what we got back? Almost nothing. No research reports, no program evaluations, no evidence of any meaningful impact whatsoever. Just payroll records for political consultants. She looked directly at Vance. Your mother struggled with opioid addiction. You wrote about how it tore your family apart. You sold millions of books describing that pain. And then you started a nonprofit that used her story, used your family's tragedy, as a fundraising pitch while funneling most of the money to your political team. Her voice hardened. You didn't fight the opioid crisis, Mr. Vice President. You monetized it, twice. Once with the book, once with the charity. And the people actually dying from opioids in Ohio never saw a dime of meaningful help from JD Vance. She paused, letting that land. Your mother's pain got you famous. Her story got you rich. And her community got nothing but a defunct website and 2 abandoned tweets. Vance looked like he'd been physically struck. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Those characterizations are, we commissioned research. Show me the research. Silence. Show me one report, one study, one program evaluation from our Ohio renewal. Anything. I'll wait. The silence stretched for 8 long seconds. The cameras captured every moment of Vance unable to produce evidence of work his own nonprofit claimed to do. Crockett sat back down. If you're feeling some type of way right now, you should be feeling some type of way. Comment receipt if you want to hear what he said about women next, because it doesn't get better. When Tapper tried to move to a new topic, Crockett politely but firmly declined. Jake, with respect, I have a few more questions for the Vice President. The American people deserve a complete picture. Tapper, sensing the historic nature of what was unfolding, nodded. 5 more minutes, Congresswoman. That's all I need. She opened a new section of her folder. Mr. Vice President, I want to talk about something you said in 2021, a Fox News interview with Tucker Carlson. You were running for Senate at the time. Vance braced himself. He knew what was coming. You said, and I'm quoting directly, we are effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made. And so they want to make the rest of the country miserable, too. She looked up. Childless cat ladies. That's what you called women without children. Miserable. Bad choices. That was taken out of context. Let me provide more context then. Same interview, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. How does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it? Another paper. 2020 podcast interview, being childless makes people more sociopathic and ultimately our whole country a little bit less mentally stable. Another. The 2021 fundraising email, your campaign, your signature. We can't have people who don't have a direct stake in this country making our most important decisions. We've allowed ourselves to be dominated by childless sociopaths. Crockett set down the papers. So, let me introduce you to some of these childless sociopaths you've been talking about. She pulled out printed photographs. Maria Gonzalez, she's a nurse in Cincinnati. She wanted children more than anything. She went through 4 rounds of IVF, spent $60,000, drained her savings. It didn't work. Her body couldn't carry a pregnancy. She's 52 now. She spent her whole career taking care of other people's children in the NICU. She held up another photo. Jennifer Park lost her daughter at 18 weeks. Stillbirth. The grief broke her marriage, broke her health. Her doctors told her another pregnancy could kill her. She teaches elementary school now, 30 years. Thousands of children she's helped raise. Another photo. Rebecca Thompson. Same story you told in Hillbilly Elegy, actually, grew up with an addicted mother, foster care, abuse. When she finally got stable enough to think about family, she was 43 and single. She runs a nonprofit, a real nonprofit, helping kids in foster care. Crockett set down the photos. You called these women sociopaths, miserable. You said they have no stake in the country. You said they shouldn't make decisions about America's future. She pointed at Vance. Meanwhile, you, a man with 3 children, voted against protecting IVF access. You voted against the very procedure that might have helped Maria Gonzalez become the mother she desperately wanted to be. The audience was absolutely still. So, here's my question, Mr. Vice President. Jennifer Aniston, the actress, responded to your cat lady's comment publicly. You know what you said. You called her response disgusting. A woman sharing her fertility struggles was disgusting to you. Crockett's voice dropped. But voting against IVF while calling childless women sociopaths, that's not disgusting. That's just Tuesday for JD Vance. She leaned forward. You don't get to claim you're pro-family while attacking women who couldn't have families. You don't get to call people sociopaths and then vote against the medical procedures that might help them. That's not pro-family. That's anti-woman dressed up in family values language. Vance tried to respond, something about sarcasm, about policy, not personal attacks, but his voice was shaking now. The confident Yale debater was gone. In his place was someone realizing in real time that every word he'd ever said was being read back to him. I want every woman watching this who struggled with fertility, who's been called less than because her body couldn't do what she wanted it to do, I want you to know, you are not a sociopath. You are not miserable. You are not making bad choices. And you deserve a vice president who respects your pain instead of using it for fundraising emails. The applause started slowly, then built. Tapper didn't try to stop it. Crockett let the applause fade naturally. When the room was quiet again, her expression shifted. The prosecutorial edge hardened into something closer to cold fury. Mr. Vice President, I've saved the best for last, or the worst, depending on how you look at it. She pulled out her final section of documents. Springfield, Ohio, your state, your people. September 2024. Vance visibly stiffened. You posted on X. I'll read it exactly. Months ago, I raised the issue of Haitian illegal immigrants draining social services and generally causing chaos all over Springfield, Ohio. Reports now show that people have had their pets abducted and eaten by people who shouldn't be in this country. She looked up. Pets abducted and eaten. That's what you told America about Haitian immigrants in Springfield. I was reporting what my constituents, let me tell you what your staff was doing while you were posting, Crockett interrupted. September 9, 2024, the same day you posted that tweet. Your aide called Brian Phillips, the city manager of Springfield. Want to know what Brian Phillips told your aide? She read from a printout. These claims are baseless. There have been no credible reports of pets being harmed by immigrants. She let that sink in. Baseless. That's what the city manager told your staff before you posted. And you posted anyway. The audience was murmuring now. But wait, it gets worse. ABC News reported that your team was informed the claims were false, and you went ahead with spreading the rumor anyway, and then Donald Trump amplified it on a debate stage watched by 67 million people. She pulled out more documents. Do you know what happened after you spread that lie? She read a list, her voice steady but heavy with the weight of each item. September 12, bomb threat called into Springfield City Hall. Entire building evacuated. City workers standing in the parking lot, not knowing if their workplace was about to explode. September 13, bomb threats to 2 elementary schools. Children, Mr. Vice President, evacuated. Parents racing to schools, crying in parking lots, not knowing if their kids were safe. Teachers trying to keep 6-year-olds calm while leading them outside because someone threatened to blow up their school. September 14, Springfield Hospital received a bomb threat. Full lockdown. Patients in the ICU wondering if they were about to be attacked. Nurses trying to evacuate people who couldn't walk on their own. September 15th, 16th, 17th, more threats, more evacuations, more terror. The FBI had to deploy additional resources to Ohio because the threats wouldn't stop. Crockett set down the list. I talked to a principal from one of those schools. She didn't want her name used because she's still afraid. She told me about a first grader named Maya who asked her teacher, "Are we going to die because of the Haitian people?" That's what your created story did, Mr. Vice President. It made a 6-year-old afraid of her neighbors. It made her think she might die because of immigrants who've never done anything to her. She was pacing now, unable to contain her energy. And the Haitian community, these are people who came to Ohio legally. Many of them under temporary protected status programs that your own party established. They came to work. They came to contribute. They came to live the American dream you claim to represent. And you painted a target on their backs for political points. Crockett's voice was shaking now, not with fear, but with barely contained rage. Children in your state were pulled out of classrooms because someone called in bomb threats. Families were terrorized. A community was demonized. And it happened because you spread a lie that your own staff told you was false. You knew it wasn't true. You spread it anyway because it was useful. She held up a printed screenshot. But my favorite part, my absolute favorite part, is what you said when CNN asked you about it. You said, if I have to create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do. She stared at him, and for the first time, her voice cracked slightly. Create stories. You admitted it. You admitted you created a story, a lie, about immigrants eating pets. And when that lie resulted in bomb threats against children, Mr. Vice President, you didn't apologize. You didn't retract. You said you'd do it again if you had to. You said the created story was worth it. She pulled out one final document. This is a letter from the Haitian Community Help and Support Center in Springfield. They documented 47 hate incidents in the 2 weeks after your post. Families afraid to send their children to school. Workers afraid to go to their jobs. A community that came to Ohio legally, many under temporary protected status programs your own party established, terrorized because the Vice President of the United States decided their suffering was useful for political points. Crockett stood up. You wrote hillbilly elegy about feeling forgotten, about being dismissed, about being treated like you didn't matter by people with power. She pointed at him. And then you became the powerful person who made other people feel forgotten. You made Haitian families in Springfield feel exactly the way you said you felt growing up in Middletown, scared, dismissed, like their lives didn't matter. Her voice rose. You're not hillbilly elegy, Mr. Vice President. You're the villain in someone else's hillbilly elegy. You're the system that abandoned them. You're the politician who used their pain for clicks. She was nearly shouting now. Children were pulled out of schools, children, because you created a story, and you have the audacity to sit here talking about family values. The audience was on their feet, some cheering, some booing, all of them completely absorbed in what was happening. Hillbilly fraud, Crockett said, her voice cutting through the noise. That's what you are, not hillbilly elegy. Hillbilly fraud. And Springfield, Ohio, your own state, is the proof. She sat down, breathing hard. Tapper called for a break. Vance didn't move. When the cameras came back, Crockett was calm again, eerily calm. Mr. Vice President, I want to give you an opportunity, one chance, a moment of honesty. Vance looked up. He'd aged 10 years in the last hour. Name one decision you've made in your entire political career where you chose what was right over what was profitable. Where you chose the people over the donors, where you chose principle over ambition. She waited. One decision. That's all I'm asking. Show this audience that somewhere, sometime, the JD Vance who wrote about being abandoned by elites actually fought for ordinary people instead of becoming one of those elites. Vance opened his mouth. I've consistently advocated for working families. Not policies, not talking points. A decision. One moment where JD Vance had to choose between doing the right thing and advancing his career, and he chose right. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 20, 30. Vance looked at his hands, at the floor, at anywhere except the cameras capturing every second of his inability to answer. I can provide many examples of my policy work. That's not what I asked. The silence resumed. 40 seconds now, an eternity on live television. Finally, Crockett spoke again. Nothing. Not one moment. From America's Hitler to America's vice president, every single step was calculated. Every position was purchased. Every principle was negotiable. She gathered her papers slowly, methodically. You didn't change your mind about Donald Trump. You changed your price. You didn't fight for Appalachia. You exploited it. You didn't help opioid victims. You monetized their suffering. You didn't tell the truth about Springfield. You created stories. She looked directly into the camera. The American people deserve leaders who have at least one moment they can point to and say, there, that's when I chose right over easy. JD Vance has been in public life for a decade. He's made millions of dollars. He's accumulated enormous power. And he cannot name a single moment when he chose the people over himself. She turned back to Vance. That's not a leader, Mr. Vice President. That's a brand, a product, a very expensive piece of merchandise that Peter Thiel bought for $15 million and Donald Trump installed in the White House. She stood up. And the American people finally got to see the receipt. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. Vance walked off the stage without shaking hands, without acknowledging the audience, without speaking to reporters. His team surrounded him like Secret Service around a wounded president, which in a way, he was. Cell phone footage caught him in the green room, slumped in a chair, staring at nothing while aides scrambled around him. The video hit 40 million views in the first 12 hours. By the end of the week, it had crossed 100 million across all platforms. Vance Exposed trended globally for 3 days straight. Late-night hosts didn't even write jokes, they just played clips and let their audiences react. Stephen Colbert watched the 40-second silence in real time on his show, saying nothing, letting the awkwardness speak for itself. The crowd's uncomfortable laughter said everything. Every major newspaper ran analysis pieces. The Washington Post, the night JD Vance's origin story collapsed. The New York Times, Crockett vs. Vance, when preparation meets hubris. The Wall Street Journal, hardly a liberal outlet, ran an editorial titled, The Vance Problem, when ambition outpaces authenticity. Peter Thiel released a statement that said nothing and everything. JD Vance is an accomplished public servant who makes his own decisions. My support for his 2022 Senate campaign was based on his stated positions at that time. The careful distance was obvious. The past tense was devastating. The billionaire who'd purchased a vice president was already calculating exit strategies. The associates began quietly leaking to reporters. Peter's burned, one told Politico. He invested in someone he thought could carry the movement forward. Now he's wondering if it was all performance. Another said, there's a reason Peter hasn't committed to 2028 support. Tonight's why. In Springfield, Ohio, the Haitian Community Help and Support Center held a prayer vigil. Over 1,000 people showed up, Haitian immigrants, white residents who'd grown to appreciate their new neighbors, clergy from every denomination. They didn't mention Vance by name. They didn't have to. The sign said things like, we are not a story, and, our lives are not your campaign points. A woman named Marie Claire Joseph spoke at the vigil. She'd come to Springfield 3 years ago under temporary protected status. She worked at a local manufacturing plant. Her son was in second grade at one of the schools that received bomb threats. For 2 weeks, my son didn't want to go to school, she said through tears. He asked me if people were going to hurt us because we're Haitian. He's 7 years old. He shouldn't have to ask that question. And the Vice President of the United States, the man who's supposed to protect all Americans, he's the one who made my son afraid. The video of her speech went viral too, 60 million views. The Republican Party's response was telling: silence. No surrogates defending Vance on Sunday shows. No rapid response statements. No, the media is unfair, pushback that had become reflexive for the MAGA movement. Just a vacuum where support should have been. Senators who'd campaigned with Vance in 2022 suddenly had scheduling conflicts when reporters asked about the town hall. House Republicans, even the ones who'd praised hillbilly elegy on the floor, found themselves unable to comment. One anonymous congressman told The Hill, "What are we supposed to say?" She read his own words back to him. That's not a spin problem. That's a truth problem. Within a week, polling showed Vance's approval had dropped 15 points in swing states. In Ohio, his home state, his favorability went underwater for the first time since his 2022 Senate campaign. A focus group in Columbus, conducted by a Republican polling firm, found that the phrase, 40 seconds of nothing, had become shorthand for political inauthenticity. When asked what they remembered from the town hall, every single participant mentioned the silence. Donors who'd committed to the 2028 presidential campaign Vance was clearly building suddenly had scheduling conflicts with fundraising calls. A bundler who'd raised over $2 million for his super PAC told Axios, "I'm not lighting money on fire for someone who can't answer a simple question about his own principles." That town hall wasn't just embarrassing. It was disqualifying. The Wall Street Journal ran an editorial, "The Vance Problem, When Ambition Outpaces Authenticity." The New York Times did a 12,000-word investigation into our Ohio renewal that essentially confirmed everything Crockett had said, and found additional problems. The charity had sponsored exactly one event in 5 years, a panel discussion at a conservative think tank that Vance himself spoke at. The Times found no evidence of any direct services to opioid victims. Former AppHarvest workers appeared on CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News, telling stories about the healthcare vote, about 100-degree greenhouses, about a company that promised to save Appalachia and abandoned it instead. Anthony Morgan, the worker whose letter Crockett had read, became something of a folk hero. He started a GoFundMe to help other former AppHarvest workers cover medical bills from injuries sustained on the job. It raised $4 million in 10 days. 2 weeks after the town hall, a class action lawsuit was filed against AppHarvest's former board members, including Vance. The suit alleged that board members had received reports about dangerous working conditions and voted to cut safety measures to preserve stock prices. Vance's lawyer issued a statement calling the suit politically motivated. But the discovery process promised to unearth board meeting minutes, emails, and internal communications that Vance had hoped would never see daylight. A month later, the Department of Justice announced it was reviewing our Ohio renewals tax filings for potential violations. The IRS opened a separate inquiry. Former staffers began talking to investigators. One told the Washington Post on condition of anonymity, "We knew it was mostly about building JD's brand for his political career. The opioid stuff was window dressing, but we didn't think anyone would ever look closely enough to figure that out." The Atlantic ran a profile of Jai Chabria, the political consultant who'd received more money from our Ohio renewal than the charity had spent on programs. Chabria refused to be interviewed, but former colleagues described an operation that was always more about JD's future than Ohio's present. One said, "Jai would literally joke about it. He called it the Vance Foundation for the Advancement of JD Vance." We all laughed. It doesn't seem funny anymore. Vance tried to recover. He gave interviews where he stuck to talking points about policy achievements. He held rallies in friendly territory where crowds were screened to remove potential protesters. He wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal about media distortion that convinced no one. But the damage was done. Every time he appeared in public, someone would shout, 40 seconds, or hold up a sign reading, "Hillbilly fraud." Protesters brought cat toys, a reference to both the Springfield lie and his childless cat lady's comment. One woman at a rally in Pennsylvania held up a sign that just said, "Name one," in huge letters. Security escorted her out, but not before the cameras caught Vance's face when he saw it. Someone made a TikTok comparing his positions over time, 2016 versus 2022 versus 2024, set to a dramatic score. It had 80 million views. Young people who'd never heard of Vance before suddenly knew him as the guy who couldn't answer for 40 seconds. It became a meme format, videos of people being asked embarrassing questions, then cutting to 40 seconds of uncomfortable silence. SNL did a sketch where a Vance impersonator was asked to name one principled decision. The silence went on for the entire sketch, 4 minutes, with increasingly absurd cutaways to the audience aging, seasons changing, civilizations rising and falling. It wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. The audience couldn't stop laughing. Trump characteristically distanced himself with surgical precision. Asked about Vance at a press conference, he delivered what might have been the most devastating comment of all: JD's doing his job. He's fine. Vice presidents don't really matter that much, you know. I've always said that. What else? Next question. The lukewarm support was worse than criticism. Vice presidents don't really matter. Trump had just told the world that his own vice president was irrelevant, expendable, forgettable, not worth defending. Political observers noted that Trump hadn't used a single positive adjective: no tremendous, no fantastic, no just fine. In Trump's vocabulary, fine was a death sentence. A week later, Trump was asked if he'd choose Vance again as his running mate. He paused, a pause that felt almost as long as Vance's 40 seconds, and said, "We'll see. We have a lot of great people, a lot of options. JD's been fine. We'll see. We'll see." The presidential seal of uncertainty. Sources inside the White House told multiple outlets that Trump had been embarrassed by the town hall and blamed Vance's team for inadequate preparation. One aide said Trump had watched the 40-second silence 3 times, shaking his head each time. He kept saying, "Who can't answer that question? Who doesn't have one thing to point to?" For Trump, who never shuts up, the silence was incomprehensible. The most devastating blow came from an unexpected source. Vance's former Yale roommate, Josh McLaurin, the man who'd originally released the "America's Hitler" text, gave an interview to The Atlantic. "The JD I knew in law school had real beliefs," McLaurin said. "He genuinely cared about inequality, about working-class suffering, about doing the right thing. I watched him abandon all of it, piece by piece, check by check. The saddest part isn't that he sold out. It's that he sold out so cheaply. $15 million to become someone else entirely. That's nothing. That's rounding error for the people who bought him." The article included a photo from their law school graduation, 2 young men smiling, full of potential. One had become a Democratic state senator fighting for voting rights. The other had become a cautionary tale about the price of ambition. These days, JD Vance exists in the White House like a ghost with a title. He still has the office. He still has the motorcade. He still gets introduced as the Vice President of the United States at events where his presence is required by protocol. But something fundamental has changed. The man who once couldn't stop talking, who gave interviews to anyone with a microphone, who posted constantly on social media, who seemed physically incapable of staying out of the spotlight, has become invisible. His public schedule, once packed with solo rallies and media appearances, now consists almost entirely of ceremonial events where he stands behind Trump, claps on cue, and says nothing. When reporters shout questions, his handlers physically steer him away. When he does speak, it's from prepared remarks that never deviate from the script. The freewheeling Yale debater who thought he could outsmart anyone has been replaced by a man who's terrified of unscripted moments. Sources inside the White House describe a vice president who's been quietly demoted from the inner circle. He's no longer in the room for major policy decisions. His calls to donors go unreturned. His staff has shrunk by 1/3, people jumping ship before the brand becomes completely toxic. Trump, when asked about his vice president at a recent press conference, delivered what might have been the most devastating assessment possible: JD, he's doing his job. He shows up. Next question. He shows up. That's it. No, tremendous. No, incredible. No, the best vice president in history. Just, he shows up. In Trump's vocabulary, that's not faint praise. That's a eulogy. But here's the truly hilarious part, the part that makes you wonder if JD Vance has ever met the internet. He still thinks he's running for president in 2028. I'm not joking. According to multiple reports, Vance's team has been quietly reaching out to donors, testing messages, laying groundwork for a presidential campaign. The man who couldn't answer a simple question for 40 seconds on live television, the man whose approval rating is now underwater in his home state, genuinely believes he should be the next leader of the free world. Let that sink in. A political consultant who spoke to Vance's team told Politico, "They seem to think Americans will forget. They keep saying the news cycle moves fast. I don't think they understand how the internet works. That 40-second clip will be the first result when anyone Googles his name for the rest of his life." And it's true. Try it yourself. Google JD Vance. The autocomplete suggestions now include JD Vance 40 seconds, JD Vance silence, and JD Vance can't answer. That's not going away. That's not something you spin. That's digital concrete. Every time someone mentions Vance 2028 on social media, the responses are immediate and brutal. People post the silence clip. They post the "America's Hitler" text. They post Anthony Morgan's letter about App Harvest. The opposition research is already done. Jasmine Crockett did it on live television, and 63 million people watched. One Republican strategist, speaking anonymously, put it bluntly: running JD Vance for president would be like running the Titanic for Safest Ship Awards. The iceberg footage is already viral. But Vance apparently doesn't see it that way. In his mind, he's still the hillbilly elegy success story, the voice of the forgotten working class, the future of the Republican Party. The fact that he was exposed as a fraud who exploited working-class pain for personal advancement, that's just media bias. The fact that he spread lies that resulted in bomb threats against children, that's just taken out of context. The fact that he couldn't name a single principled decision in his entire career, well, surely people will forget about that. Sure, JD. Keep telling yourself that. Of course, before Vance can start measuring the Oval Office for new curtains, he might have some other appointments to keep. The Department of Justice investigation into our Ohio renewal is reportedly progressing. What that means exactly, no one outside the DOJ knows. But investigators have been interviewing former staffers, requesting documents, and asking pointed questions about where exactly that charity money went. The class action lawsuit from former App Harvest workers is scheduled for discovery next year. That process will force the release of internal emails, board meeting minutes, and communications that Vance's team has desperately tried to keep buried. The workers' attorneys have already indicated they intend to subpoena Vance himself for a deposition. Imagine that, the Vice President of the United States under oath, being asked to explain why he voted to cut health care for workers making $12 an hour in 100-degree greenhouses. Being asked to reconcile his "champion of the working class" brand with his actual decisions. Being asked once again to name one time he chose principle over profit. 40 seconds of silence hits different when you're under oath and the opposing counsel is taking notes. Legal experts are careful not to predict outcomes, but several have noted that the pattern Crockett identified, the correlation between donations and decisions, the charity that paid political consultants more than it spent on programs, the board votes that benefited investors over workers, raises serious questions that won't be resolved by press statements. One former federal prosecutor told MSNBC, if even half of what was presented in that town hall is accurate and provable, Vance has significant legal exposure. Not necessarily criminal, though that's not off the table, but certainly civil liability that could follow him for years. So, here's the timeline as it currently stands. Vance wants to announce a presidential campaign sometime in 2026 or early 2027. The App Harvest lawsuit is scheduled for 2026. The DOJ investigation has no public timeline but shows no signs of slowing down. There's a very real possibility that JD Vance will be announcing his candidacy for President of the United States around the same time he's being deposed in a lawsuit about worker exploitation. There's a very real possibility that his campaign launch will be interrupted by news of a DOJ referral. He wrote a book about how his family was failed by the system. How poetic would it be if that same system, the courts, the investigators, the processes he spent his career trying to circumvent, finally caught up with him? The Hillbilly Elegy sequel nobody asked for, Hillbilly Defendant. In Jasmine Crockett's congressional office, there's a new addition to the wall. It's a photograph from the town hall, not the famous 40 seconds shot that went viral, but a different one. This photo captures the moment just before, when Crockett asked the question and Vance's face first registered that he had no answer. The confidence draining, the calculation failing, the mask slipping. Next to the photo, in Crockett's own handwriting, is a note: "This is what happens when corruption meets courage. Don't stop. Don't ever stop." She didn't frame it as a trophy. When a reporter asked about it, she was clear: it's not about celebrating someone's downfall. It's about remembering that accountability is possible. That preparation beats arrogance. That receipts matter. And it's a reminder to myself, there are more JD Vances out there. We're not done. 2 months after the town hall, Crockett announced her campaign for U.S. Senate. The launch video featured clips from the confrontation, not the attacks, but the silences. The moments when evidence met evasion and evasion lost. She's leading in every poll. Donations are breaking records. Young voters who'd never engaged with politics before are volunteering in numbers her campaign can barely manage. And every time she speaks at a rally, someone in the crowd holds up a sign: "Do the homework." It's become a movement slogan, a reminder that the most powerful weapon in democracy isn't money or connections or media savvy. It's preparation. It's receipts. It's the willingness to ask simple questions and wait for answers that never come. This story doesn't have a perfect ending. JD Vance is still vice president. He still has power, even if that power has been diminished. The system that created him, the billionaire donors, the revolving door between media and politics, the incentive structures that reward ambition over integrity, still exists. Peter Thiel is still a billionaire. Dark money still flows. Politicians still sell out. But something changed that night in Ohio. Every corrupt official in America watched that town hall. Every politician who's ever flip-flopped for money saw what happens when someone brings receipts. Every consultant who's ever advised a client to ride the wave regardless of principles now knows someone might ask you to name one decision you made for the right reasons. And they might be willing to wait 40 seconds while you fail to answer. That fear, that tiny seed of fear that your emails might be read on camera, your votes cross-referenced with your donations, your fake charity examined by forensic accountants, that fear is the beginning of change. Somewhere right now, a staffer is thinking twice before sending that email. A politician is wondering if that donation is worth the paper trail. A consultant is asking whether "ride the wave" is really good advice when the wave might crash on national television. They're scared, and they should be, because the blueprint works. Document everything. Follow the money. Make it personal with real victims. Use their own words against them. And when they can't answer a simple question, when 40 seconds of silence says more than 40 minutes of spin ever could, let that silence echo. The receipts are out there. The patterns are traceable. The accountability is possible. And someone, somewhere, is doing the homework right now. So, let me ask you something. Do you really believe JD Vance will be president in 2028? The man who called his current boss America's Hitler and then became his most loyal defender for $15 million. The men who voted to cut healthcare for workers and then wrote books about caring for workers. The men who spread lies about immigrants eating pets and admitted he created stories for political gain. The men who, when asked to name one principled decision in his entire career, gave America 40 seconds of absolutely nothing. That guy, President of the United States. Maybe his campaign slogan will be, "Make silence great again." Maybe his platform will be, "Trust me, I've changed, again." Maybe he'll run on his record, of what, exactly? Being purchased, being exposed, being unable to answer a simple question on live television. Here's my prediction. Before JD Vance announces his 2028 campaign, he'll be announcing a new legal team. Before he starts measuring the Oval Office for curtains, he'll be sitting for depositions. Before he gives his first presidential campaign speech, clips from the town hall will have been viewed 1 billion times. The internet doesn't forget. The receipts don't disappear. And the 40 seconds of silence will follow him forever. So, what do you think? Comment and tell me, where does JD Vance end up first, the Oval Office or a courtroom? Share this with anyone who needs to know that accountability is still possible. Share it with anyone who's ever felt like the powerful always get away with it. Share it with anyone who watched that town hall and felt, maybe for the first time in a long time, like the truth actually matters. And if you're a politician reading this, if you're someone who's taken money you shouldn't have taken, made promises you never intended to keep, sold out the people you claim to serve, I want you to know something. Someone is doing the homework on you right now. Someone is cross-referencing your donations with your decisions. Someone is reading your old tweets, your emails, your board meeting minutes. Someone is finding the workers you exploited, the communities you abandoned, the principles you sold. And when they're ready, when they've got the folder, the timeline, the receipts, they're going to ask you one simple question. Name one decision where you chose right over profitable. Just one. I'll wait. How long do you think your silence will last? Drop a comment. Who needs the Crockett treatment next? Share this because accountability only works if enough people are watching.